For those of you I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is David Trulio, and it is my privilege to serve as the President and CEO of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate what would have been President Reagan's 114th birthday. I would like to begin by recognizing some of the special guests with us here today. From the Reagan family, President Reagan's granddaughter, Ashley, and her husband, Joe. We also have with us today the following members of the Board of Trustees of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute: Andrew Littlefair and Bob Tuttle. Also with us today is former Congressman from this area, Elton Gallegly, and his wife, Janice. There are over a dozen first responders in attendance today, including members of the Los Angeles Police Department's Metropolitan Division, designated by number 114 by the LAPD. And this is remarkably fitting given that it's President Reagan's 114th birthday. And especially following the devastating fires last month, we are doubly grateful for all of those first responders who put their lives on the line to protect and to serve. As noted, we gather to celebrate Ronald Reagan's 114th birthday, or as he would describe it, the 75th anniversary of his 39th birthday. I would like to give a very special thank you to all the servicemen and women here today, including from Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. This is the Reagan Library's 20th year working with Camp Pendleton to pay tribute to President Reagan on his birthday. We are honored to have the support of our servicemen and women, especially from such an important military installation. And on behalf of everyone here, and I'm sure on behalf of everyone in our country, thank you for all that you do to serve our nation. Now, to officially begin our program in honor of the 114th birthday of Ronald Wilson Reagan, please rise for the March On of the Colors, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation by Chaplain William Stewart, Captain, United States Navy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say before I give the prayer, we chaplains get to do many ceremonies, offer prayers at many ceremonies. I don't know how many I've done, but I'm here today to tell you that this one will be the greatest honor of my entire career. President Reagan was my first commander-in-chief. We believed in him. We trusted in him. His vision for this country and what he did will probably never be replicated, y'all. What an amazing man. And now I invite you to pray with me, please. Our most gracious and mighty God, Lord, we come before you and ask for your presence here this morning. In the midst of so much beauty on these hallowed grounds, we thank you for yet another day of our most precious gift you provide us, life itself. Lord, we take pause to focus on the most amazing life of one of our greatest presidents that ever lived, Ronald Reagan. And as we honor him, we are aware that you indeed install the leaders of nations, and we see what they can truly do when they look to you for wisdom and guidance as they carry out their tremendous responsibilities as the leader of a great nation like the United States of America. As we contemplate and honor his life, Lord, help us reflect on what he so strongly believed in and cherished so much. Freedom. Freedom for the people of our great nation, but also freedom of the soul. And as he so rightly said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. So help us, O Lord, to be the generation that proudly carries on that torch of freedom for others to cherish. Finally, Lord, we ask that as we continue now with this ceremony and reflect on his life, that we fully grasp the reality that more than the number of years any of us are given here on this earth, it is how we live out our lives and what we stand for that truly makes a difference in the world. We say and ask these things in your most precious and holy name. Amen.
Please be seated. As part of this ceremony each year, we are privileged to be joined by the Commanding General, Marine Corps Installations West, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, California. This is our first year welcoming Brigadier General Nick Brown to the Reagan Presidential Library, and it was great to meet him yesterday and members of his team as the General took a tour of the Reagan Library. General, we really hope you enjoyed your time with us, and I know we'll have more time with you today. Brigadier General Brown has held numerous operational and command assignments in service of our country. He deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and deployed to Monrovia, Liberia in support of Operation Onward Liberty. Brigadier General Brown's personal decorations include the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit with Gold Star, Meritorious Service Medal with 3 Gold Stars, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, and the Navy Achievement Medal with Gold Star. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brigadier General Nick Brown.
Well, good morning, everyone. It was a cloudy day to start the day, but the sun came out once you got here because you all look so great today. To start this morning, and if you will allow me to speak on behalf of my fellow Marines and sailors that are here today, and I'm going to also assume that I can safely speak for all that are here today when I express my condolences and my thoughts and prayers to the individuals who were lost and the many families who were impacted by the Palisades and Eaton fires here in Los Angeles County last month. And I know that I'm one of the collective many who have a deep appreciation for the thousands of firefighters, police officers, pilots, medical professionals, and volunteers who bravely worked day and night for weeks on end to protect property, save lives, and provide support to their neighbors. For their heroism and humanity during this tragedy, we are all eternally grateful. I ask that you please join me in one more round of applause for those great patriots. I know that many in this region are on a long road to recovery, and as a New Yorker who watched Lower Manhattan recover after 9/11, I have no doubt that those affected communities will rebuild and come back stronger than ever, because that's what great communities do. And in that process of recovery, one thing I can assure you is that any Marine station on any one of our 6 bases in Southern California will be there when the call comes. Whenever you need us and wherever you need us, we will be there. Today, I am beyond humbled and honored by the privilege to join you on these gorgeous grounds to commemorate our 40th president. And listening to the comments earlier, the president was clearly on to something when he recounted his age as anniversaries after his 39th birthday. So we should all count that, because that keeps you young at heart. And for the young Marines and young people here, you've got time. That math, you don't have to do that math just yet. So enjoy every day until that 39th birthday. So this morning, representing your Marine Corps and the Navy team is a talented group of what I would call hybrid warriors and peacemakers, who also happen to be great musicians. They're from the historic 1st Marine Division Band, and they bring a touch of class to everything that we do in the Marine Corps. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Also here is our razor-sharp and disciplined color guard and honor guard, and you saw him here before us from the Marine Corps Air Station and Headquarters and Support Battalion, Camp Pendleton. I would also like to acknowledge and take a second to say hello to our Coast Guard brother here and say Semper Paratus, which means is Latin for always ready. The Coast Guard does the hard work every day to keep our homeland safe, and I appreciate you being here. It would only take a few minutes to spend time in this building behind us to comprehend the dynamics of that time. Ronald Reagan was a leader who believed in peace over war, but a leader who also understood that peace just doesn't happen. It requires strength, strength of diplomacy, strength of a military, strength of an economy, and strength of a nation. This sentiment was clear as he described the necessity during a speech at Hickam Air Force Base, which is one of my favorite speeches that he gave, when he said, and I quote, "The American people have never sought war or the test of arms, and yet in my lifetime, I've seen 4 such wars. None of them was because the United States was too strong or too ready. The United States is resolved to avoid war and pursue peace, and to do so by remaining strong and remaining ready. To keep our homeland secure, these young men and women demonstrate the teamwork that you see before us, professionalism, discipline, and integrity that President Reagan, as Commander-in-Chief, would expect. Now, I take that back. He would actually demand that from his best and brightest leaders. Marine sailors and Coast Guardsmen, thank you for being here today. Thank you for volunteering to serve, because you could have done anything else. And thank you for the willingness to support and defend our nation in a dangerous world. I know that President and Mrs. Reagan would be extremely proud of you and who you are and everything that you stand for. Chaplain, we're very fortunate, I would dare say blessed, to have Ronald Reagan as our 40th president. He presided during a challenging time. And the quote that I just read for President Reagan were not just words. It was his ideology. It drove his policy, informed his defense strategy, informed his presidential budgets, and was his North Star when he had to make decisions when, or even more importantly, when not to use military force. His belief in peace through strength, and of course his skill as a great communicator, drove meaningful investments to modernize equipment, advance our capabilities and doctrine, but even more telling, his ideology boosted both military and public morale, and rekindled a fighting spirit that still holds strong today in our current generation of peacemakers. President Reagan's actions as Commander-in-Chief during a challenging time in their history set a tone through the 80s and in the following decades. For the strength and readiness that defines your Marine Corps today, your Marines, and I'll speak for all sister service members, because they're smart, physically fit, well-trained, and well-equipped. Their families are resilient and extremely dedicated. They are respectful and respected and ready to fight if necessary, but also exist, as President Reagan noted, to avoid war and pursue peace. And when that mission is done, and the time comes to take off the uniform, and we all will at some point, we'll all return to society, and like many of you, as model citizens dedicated to serving others as honored veterans. But in the spirit of this coming Super Bowl, I would say that pursuing peace is a team game. Unless you have Patrick Mahomes, then it's not a team game, it's just one person. Right? But it requires the commitment of all its players to win. And our nation is fortunate that its people are committed to ensuring its military remains strong. It's an uncompromising commitment that crosses state lines, survives all the budget battles, doesn't fluctuate with changes in the government or senior leadership. That commitment is the reason that we maintain peace through strength and force our adversaries to think twice about actions that would compromise that peace. President Reagan never missed the opportunity to remind the nation and his colleagues in Washington of their role in keeping the peace. In 1986, during a visit to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Parris Island, he said, and I quote, as only as he could, elegant as he could, he said, "You know, sometimes I like to take some of those people in Washington who are always trying to cut defense spending and bring them here to Parris Island, Fort Jackson, Orlando, or Lackland, and I would tell them, these are the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are putting their lives on the line to keep America free. And if we ever must send our young people into harm's way, then it is our moral duty," and I pause on that word. He said, "It is our moral duty to give them absolutely the best equipment and support that America can muster." And with that, our Commander-in-Chief was visionary and clear, and the nation continued to respond appropriately year after year. And at no time in my career was it ever more evident than my deployments under our 22nd Secretary of Defense. So Dr. Gates, if you're watching or you have the opportunity to watch later, thank you, sir, for your support. Because every time we went forward, every time we deployed into harm's way, we always felt like we would win because Secretary Gates made sure we had the equipment that we needed. In closing, I want to make a pledge. I want to make a pledge to the President and Mrs. Reagan. And as a general, I guess I can speak on behalf of the 60,000 Marines down on Camp Pendleton when I say this. And because we're celebrating our 250th year as a Marine Corps, we have 2.5 centuries of history to back me up on what I'm about to say. And that pledge to President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan is that we will continue to do the work as Marines to be most ready when the nation is least ready. We'll continue to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and the resources that you give us. And we will conduct ourselves every day with integrity and never, ever compromise our core values of honor, courage, and commitment. I don't think the President would have it any other way. So thank you, Mr. President and Mrs. Reagan, for your example, for being faithful to our nation, and for being a dear friend of the Marine Corps. I would like to thank you all for allowing me to speak today. May God bless you, God bless the United States of America, and Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, General Brown. Really tremendous, inspiring words. Thank you. We're here today, of course, to honor and celebrate the tremendous life and legacy of President Reagan. On February 6, 1911, a son was born to Jack and Nellie Reagan. That son would go on to Eureka College, get a job as a sports broadcaster, make his way to Hollywood, thrive in Hollywood, serve in the Army, become the president of the Screen Actors Guild, make a name for himself in Republican politics, and become governor of California. which is to say, the presidency was just one chapter of a remarkable life. As that chapter came to a successful completion in January 1989, President Reagan delivered his farewell to the nation from the Oval Office. In that speech, he offered, quote, "A final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back." Some of those men and women are with us today. President Reagan referred to his vision of a shining city on a hill, saying, quote, "My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time, we made a difference. We made the city stronger, we made the city freer, and we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad at all." But his message raises an important question for all of us today. The question is this: are we just marking time, or are we making a difference? The Reagan Foundation, which President and Mrs. Reagan established, is committed to making a difference. We are not just here to remember 8 special years in history or to be nostalgic or to reflect fondly on a life well lived. We are here to advance the values that defined Ronald Reagan's life and the Reagan presidency. Values that are timeless and endure and can guide us this day and into the future. To speak to President Reagan's legacy, his values, and his principles today, we had scheduled our nation's 22nd Secretary of Defense, Dr. Robert Gates. Very unfortunately, Secretary Gates was hospitalized with an urgent health matter, but thank goodness he is fully on the mend. However, Secretary Gates very much wanted to be here, so even though he's not here in person, he is with us here in spirit. And with that in mind, he asked that we still share his message on President Reagan with all of you. To read his powerful remarks is one of the members of our Board of Trustees, Andrew Littlefair, who is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Clean Energy. Andrew also served as staff assistant to the president in the Office of Presidential Advance for President Reagan, traveling on behalf of President Reagan to, get this, 60 cities and 7 foreign countries. So Andrew, I'd like to welcome you to the microphone, please.
Well, thank you, David. Now remember, I'm Robert Gates, so he's a little bit shorter than I am. It's a real pleasure to return again to this amazing presidential library and museum. For me, it is full of memories and reminders of just how great President Reagan was. And a reminder for me how privileged I was to serve as Deputy Director of the CIA for nearly all of his 8 years as President. It is a great honor to be asked to speak here in celebration of his 114th birthday. 7 years ago on this occasion, Jim Baker opened his remarks here saying simply, "I miss Ronald Reagan." And I would say simply, ditto. Those of us fortunate enough to have worked for President Reagan carry with us many fond personal memories of his kindness, his common decency, and perhaps above all, his sense of humor. I recall one meeting in the Oval Office in early November 1985. As CIA Deputy Director, I was one of the briefers preparing the President for his first meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. I was seated at the end of the couch next to the President's wingback chair, just a couple of feet apart. I began my presentation on the stresses inside the Soviet systems and the corresponding opportunities it presented for the upcoming summit. It was the first time an American president was told by his intelligence service that the Soviet regime was doomed in the foreseeable future. A minute or two into my briefing, an incredibly high-pitched screech came out of the president's left ear. One of his hearing aids had gone awry. If I could hear it, I knew how painful it must be for him. His eyes got wide, he reached up and adjusted the hearing aid, and I resumed the briefing. A couple of minutes later, the screeching noise started again, even louder. The President, with some disgust, reached up, plucked the hearing aid out of his ear, pounded it in his palm a couple of times, and as he was putting it back in his ear, leaned over and whispered to me, "It's my KGB handler trying to reach me." President Reagan also used stories and humor to diffuse moments of tension. I remember one occasion when a mistake had been made, not one of real consequence, but it was an embarrassment for the administration. And there were some recriminations around the Situation Room table. The President intervened with a story about a businessman who had a friend opening a new branch store. He sent a flower arrangement to celebrate the occasion. His friend called the next day to thank him for the flowers, but said that there must have been a mistake by the florist because the arrangement had a card that said, "Rest in peace." Angry businessmen called the florist to demand an explanation, and the florist said, "Well, think of it this way. Today, someone was buried in this city under a floral arrangement with a card reading, 'Good luck in your new location.'" The argument in the Situation Room over a mistake was diffused by the president. I joined the CIA in 1966 to do my bit in the long struggle against the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan was, of course, the ultimate Cold Warrior. As president, his first priority was to restore America's military strength. Given that 15 years of Soviet military modernization, coupled with years of cuts in our defense spending, had narrowed and, in some cases, erased America's strategic edge over the USSR. Our broad U.S. defense buildup began early in the Reagan administration with more advanced planes and ships and submarines and combat vehicles and nuclear weapons added to the American arsenal, including a bold initiative to begin developing a missile defense system designed to render those destructive weapons obsolete. With the strong and courageous support of our NATO allies, intermediate-range missiles were put in Europe to counter the earlier deployment of many Soviet SS-20 missiles. Americans and the world did not have to wait for these weapons to begin rolling off the production lines or be deployed to realize the new president, that genial Californian, had a backbone of steel. In one 2-week period in August 1981, people at home and abroad learned there was a new sheriff in town. On August 5th, President Reagan fired more than 11,000 striking air traffic controllers who violated his order to return to work. On August 19th, Libya extended its claimed territorial waters to what Gaddafi designated the line of death. And so it would prove to be. President Reagan sent in the aircraft carriers USS Forrestal and the USS Nimitz to assure U.S. freedom of navigation. 2 Libyan fighters came out to challenge them. A fatal mistake. Under the president's new rules of engagement, 2 F-14 Tomcats splashed the 2 Libyan fighters. The world took notice that there was a president willing to use American power. But President Reagan was no warmonger, nor was he trigger-happy. He was actually quite circumspect about putting or keeping American troops and America's credibility at risk without a clear mission and strong odds of success. Rather than provoke a direct and potentially catastrophic military confrontation with the USSR, President Reagan's approach was to impose ever stiffer costs on the Soviet Union for its third world adventurism and efforts to spread its power and influence. The President expanded the containment playbook far beyond Europe and took the fight to the enemy worldwide, from Afghanistan to Cambodia, Nicaragua, Angola, Ethiopia, and elsewhere. Soviet surrogates soon faced their own lethal insurgencies, and his stirring words and his administration's actions, both overt and covert, gave hope to dissidents and millions of others trapped behind the Iron Curtain under Soviet-supported autocrats. While countering the Soviets with varying degrees of fervor and success had been a common feature of every U.S. administration since the beginning of the Cold War, under President Reagan, the struggle gained new moral energy, purpose, and a sense of urgency. He spoke blunt truths about the Soviet system and the Soviet behavior. When he spoke of the evil empire in 1983, it drove the Kremlin nuts. No one spoke these truths with more credibility or more eloquence. The sum total of these measures, large and small, communicated loud and clear at home and abroad, that post-Vietnam, post-Malaise America was back, strong and resolute. As for the Soviets, President Reagan, nearly alone, even his own administration, had the bedrock conviction that their rotting system was vulnerable and could be brought down, not as some vague historical eventuality, but as something he could actually see in his lifetime. This visionary president saw the future clearly, more so than all the cynics and skeptics at the time. But President Reagan also believed that erasing the impression of the U.S. political, economic, and military weakness would ultimately reap diplomatic rewards and strategic breakthroughs. This visionary president had the wisdom, the insight, the sense of the historical moment to know when it was time to sheathe the sword, soften the tone, and re-engage, even with our most implacable and dangerous enemy. In August 1984, following what was arguably the most dangerous 18 months of the Cold War since the Cuban Missile Crisis, Secretary of State George Shultz informed President Reagan that the Soviet Foreign Minister, Andrei Gromyko, might be interested in meeting with the President during the UN General Assembly that fall. All such meetings have been suspended since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. The President told the Secretary that he wanted to see Gromyko. Shultz makes clear in his memoir that this was President Reagan's choice and his alone. He, Shultz, had not even made a recommendation. And we now see that this small gesture marked a turning point in the Cold War. Reagan was often accused by his liberal critics of shunning the engagement with the USSR. The president, only half-jokingly, responded that it was kind of tough to engage with the Soviet gerontocracy when its leaders kept dying on him. After all, 3 of his Soviet counterparts expired within 3 years between 1982 and 1985. But finally, in March 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, and Reagan had somebody he could deal with. In Gorbachev's first months, there was a torrent of offers, proposals, and promises to make reforms at home while reducing the threat of confrontation abroad. The challenge and historic opportunity facing President Reagan was how to make the most of what Gorbachev claimed to be offering. But even in the midst of glasnost and strategic arms negotiations and reduced superpower tensions, President Reagan again and again would return to words strong and true, making them, as Margaret Thatcher said, fight like soldiers to give the Soviet leader and the system he was trying to save a final push into history's dustbin. All told, President Reagan's statecraft was a subtle two-step to push and prod for internal reform in the USSR, democratic and economic, while being willing to parlay with his Soviet counterpart and eventually agree to deep cuts in the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Often he was a number of steps ahead of his critics on both the left and the right, some of whom could not make sense of the combination. But I believe Ronald Reagan was not just more visionary, but also far more shrewd and in control of the events than either his critics or even many of his supporters thought. Communism's demise holds lessons for us today, and they include the enduring value and broad appeal of freedom, political, economic, spiritual, and the idea that free men and women of different cultures and countries can, for all the squabbling inherent in democracy, come together to get the big things right and make the tough decisions to preserve freedom at home, deter aggression, and promote liberty around the world. This should give us a reassurance as each new generation always, at some point, is called upon to make that stand. It is a sad reality, as President Reagan knew so well, that in our time and in the future, as throughout all of recorded history, there will be those who seek through violence to dominate and intimidate others. Evil will always be with us and must always be confronted. We see it anywhere nations, movements, or strongmen are tempted to believe that the United States of America does not have the will or the means to stand by our friends, to meet our commitments, and to defend our way of life. As President Reagan said, it is up to us in our time to choose, and choose wisely, between the hard but necessary task of preserving the peace and freedom and the temptation to ignore our duty and blindly hope for the best. I close with a quote from the Nobel Prize recipient Anatole France, who wrote, "To accomplish great things, we must not only act, but also dream. Not only plan, but also believe." On this anniversary of his birth, we must remember that Ronald Reagan was a great president who acted and planned, but most importantly, he dreamed and he believed, and he truly accomplished great things. Today, as those of us fortunate enough to have known and served Ronald Reagan gather to celebrate his birthday, let us be thankful for the great and gentle man, the country he inspired to believe in itself again, and the people and nations he freed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing Dr. Gates' remarks with us today. Now, I ask everyone, please rise for the laying of the wreath and honors to President Reagan. To read the 2025 Presidential Proclamation, please welcome Reagan Foundation and Institute board member and former U.S. Ambassador to the Court of St. James, Bob Tuttle. Bob, please join us on stage. And to help, how about a hand for Bob? And to help lay the wreath will be President Reagan's granddaughter, Ashley Reagan Dunster, and her husband, Joe Dunster.
The President of the United States has directed that a presidential wreath be laid at the resting place of all former presidents on the anniversary of their birth. Brigadier General Nick Brown, Commanding General of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, California, is designated to place a wreath at the tomb of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, on the 6th of February, 2025, in honor of the 114th anniversary of his birth and in tribute to his distinguished service to a grateful nation. Thank you.
Please remain standing for the retiring of the colors and the conclusion of the ceremony with anchors away and the Marines hymn. Birthday. Birthday cake will now be served in the Presidential Learning Center, and you don't have to blow out 114 candles to get a slice of cake. Thank you all so much for coming. What a beautiful and powerful time together, and this concludes the ceremony. Thank you.